When my daughter was in grade 1, she was at quite an expensive, exclusive independent girls' school. Mark Shuttleworth went to space. And he was the first South African in space. And so you can imagine that was a very exciting time for South Africa. And as they tend to do, the teachers said to us, please won't we send the inside of a toilet roll so that the kids could celebrate Mark Shuttleworth going to space, and they would all make their little rockets. And so they did. And then when it came time to go for the parents' evening, we walked into the classroom, and there was this string hanging at the top of the wall, on the top of the roof, with all the rockets that the girls had made hanging down from the string. And I'll give you no prizes for guessing which of these rockets was my daughter's. Now, if you said the orange one with the funny pieces of string coming off, you can guess you guessed right. So the teacher walked up to us and said, you know, she's a little bit worried about Kate. The task that the kids were given, Kate seemed not to be able to complete that task. And maybe we need to think about sending her for therapy or something like that. And I looked at her very weird rocket, and I called her aside and I said to her, Katie, tell me what's going on here. And she said to me, Dad, well, Mark Shuttleworth went on a spacewalk. And when he went on a spacewalk, he had to have an umbilical cord attaching him to the rocket. And that's what all those strings are. In fact, they'd been given these straight pieces of paper to stick onto the bottom of the rocket to be the fire. That's those pieces you see going down. And Katie had actually applied a skill that she had learned outside of her school, where she pulled the piece of paper through a pair of scissors so that it curled up nicely. And that's what she stuck to her rocket. And what this lesson taught me was my daughter had an unconventional way of thinking and had a very artistic sort of feel about her work. And I'm very pleased to tell you she graduated at the end of last year with a fine art degree from Wits University. So I'm not so sure about the therapies. Well, what does this have to do with Evolve? Evolve tries to shift the playing field as far as education is concerned. Evolve tries to take what we've always done in education across the world and restructure it so that it is more focused on what children need and less focused on the efficiency of an industrial age education that was the root of the sort of factory approach to teaching and learning, which we have in most schools. And the question is, how does that work? How does the Evolve curriculum work? So I'm going to show you a very confusing diagram, and I'm going to say, this is how it works, and that's the end of the webinar. Let's have a conversation. I'm teasing. So this is a very complicated view of what we call our curriculum maps or our progression maps. And you don't need a complicated view when you're trying to find out about what on earth are we trying to do with education. So I'm going to take it piece by piece. We are using a model developed by MIT for its aeronautical engineering department called the Cross-Links Curriculum Mapping Model. And this model starts with an item, a thing that we want children to do. And it starts with us asking the question, what should a child know or be able to do in order for us to say they've done what is required for them to graduate? What should any child, when they leave school, know and be able to do? And if you have the answer to that question, then you just work backwards from there. That's why we call it backward mapping. And you map the curriculum backwards all the way from grade 12 to grade R, where you say, well, if they need to do this, then what do they have to do first? And what do they have to do before that? And what do they have to do before that? And that leads you to this very complicated picture that I showed you right at the beginning, which is, mapping back from the end point to the beginning, and then starting children at the beginning and moving them forward to the end point. So we have this thing that we want children to learn or know how to do. It came from somewhere, usually. So what came before is important because it answers the question, in order to succeed at doing this thing, what should children already have succeeded at? Or what relates to this thing that we are trying to get a child to succeed at? And if we know what relates to it, we can again know how to deepen a child's learning, deepen a child's understanding of the thing we're trying to teach them. Now that we know where we came from, and now that we know what else is related to it, we can start the learning journey with the child to learn that thing. And it starts with a learn. It starts with the material that a child needs, the lecture they need, the debate they need, the conversations they have, the research they do, the games they play in order to learn to do this thing or know this thing. Once we've taught it to them, or once they've taught it, learned it through the system, the next thing we ask them to do is to apply what they've learned, to use what they've learned in various situations and different examples so that they can learn and practice what they've learned. And when they think they're ready, then they can try to master what they've learned. And they might try to master it, and possibly they get some of it right, but not all of it right. And if that's the case, they can just go back, and they could go back to the learn part, or they could go back to the apply part and practice a bit more. And when they think they're ready, they just try the mastery test again. And maybe they've improved a bit, and they're ready to go on to the next thing, but they're not quite happy with what they've got. So they just go back again, and they try and master it a third time. And the third time, they're really convinced that they've understood it, or we're convinced that they've understood it. And then it's possible for them to advance to the next thing. So basically, it goes from learning to applying to testing to see whether you've mastered it. And once you're sure you've mastered it, you can then apply, you can then move on to learning the next thing in your stream, or in your learning stream. And you apply this to all the topics within a learning area, or you apply this to all the different skills that you're trying to teach the children. That's a pattern that they will follow throughout their learning process and evolve. And the critical thing that I want to highlight here is that it's not so much the whether or not they've got enough. It's about whether they've mastered it. They have to have mastered the thing that they're trying to learn before we are ready to let them move on to the next thing. Because if you don't follow that approach, then what happens is that children move to the next level with gaps. So how does this then differ from a normal schooling process or a normal conventional education process? The answer is that marks are not what matters. Mastery is what matters. In a conventional school situation, children are grouped together by age into a single class. If you're in a really good school, there may be 20, 25 children, maybe even 18 children in that class. The teacher teaches the same thing to everybody at the same time. And then when it's time to teach the next thing, the teacher moves on. Really good teachers might do some tests to see whether children have understood and cycle back, but the data structures don't exist, and the processes don't exist for most schools to be able to understand deeply what each child has learned and what each child is still struggling with. It also means that if your child understood it right from the beginning, they're not going to be able to advance until the others are ready to advance as well. So what we are doing at Evolve is we are creating a structure or system that allows a child to take as long or as little time as they need to move from one learning item to the next learning item in each of their subject areas, so that they can progress at a speed that is comfortable for them. And you may find, and I always laugh, or I don't laugh, I enjoy when a new baby is presented to me, and the parents will tell me, she is the cleverest child in the world. And I think we all believe that our child is the cleverest child in the world, and we're right. Our children are the cleverest children in the world. Every child has a special talent. Every child has a special skill. The trick is developing an education system that will unearth that. And without the right data structures, I don't think a school can possibly claim to be successful in any systematic way. It becomes a hit and a miss situation in those situations. What we're trying to do, quite simply, and I'm now moving on to a new metaphor, is we are trying to find the Goldilocks zone for each child. And I know that many of you may know the story of Goldilocks. For those of you who don't, Goldilocks was this little girl who got lost in the woods, found this house that was inhabited by 3 bears. There was Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear. And then when she went in, she was very hungry, and the porridge of Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear was sitting on the table. And she tried Papa Bear's porridge and it was too hot, and she tried Mama Bear's porridge and it was just right. Too cold. And when she went to Baby Bear's porridge, it was just right, so she ate it all up. And then when she went upstairs to the beds, she tried Papa Bear's bed and it was too hard, and Mama Bear's bed was too soft, but Baby Bear's bed was just right, so she lay down and fell asleep. Finding the just right is the issue here. The Earth is in what we call the Goldilocks zone of our solar system. Too far away from the sun so that it doesn't burn up, and not so far that it freezes everybody to death. It's in the perfect space for it to sustain our life and for us to be able to live and breathe on this planet. Now, if you have a child who is struggling to learn, they might be here with in the too hot zone, and it's uncomfortable for them. Likewise, if they're bored because they've already learned it, they find themselves sitting on Mars and far too cold and not comfortable in their learning. I'm going to use a very technical jargon word now. There's an educational theorist called Vygotsky who talks about the zone of proximal development, by which he means you need to get children to that point where the task you are giving them is not so hard that they give up, but not so easy that they're bored. And by using a curriculum mapping system like ours, and by using our learning activators and our artificial intelligence in the back end, we are able to do what we need to do to try and keep children happily and comfortably in the Goldilocks zone of their learning. So what we've developed is a set of learning areas for each phase, and we don't talk about grades, we talk about phases. And within each phase, we have 3 years or 4 years in the case of the first reception phase, where children would spend time. Some children might spend all 4 years there. Some children might move on a little bit earlier in 2 years or 3 years. Other children might take 5 years to move past this phase. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be dealing with a child who feels that they're too old for their grade or too young for their grade. You're not going to be dealing with, because the social interaction process will allow children to be comfortable, and because they will be working with work that they're not comparing to everybody else. They're not saying, oh, look what he's reading, look what I'm reading, look what she's reading. Everybody is reading what they are able to read and excited to read. In this reception phase, we've broken the subjects into, and you'll see digital mastery is a subject area that is consistent from foundation phase all the way to the further education and training. Right from grade R all the way to grade 12, we are doing a course in digital mastery. And obviously the nature of that and the sophistication of that will change as children get older and older. There's also the numeracy aspects, the mathematics, that is a consistent theme. There's also the languages that they will do. Now, we move from literacy to literacies, and then finally to our first additional language and our home language. And the concept is here in the literacy section, the focus is on English primarily. We might do some fun exercises where we teach them a few words or phrases or songs from other languages, but our focus here is on the language of teaching and learning. Once they get into the intermediate phase and the senior phase, they then start to get a bit more in-depth teaching and learning around languages. And the great thing is they can do as many or as few of those as they want to do. but they don't want to be overwhelmed. So before you get very excited as parents and say, I want my child to do 10 languages, just remember they also have to play sometimes. We then have in the intermediate, in the foundation phase, we have a subject area there called Journeys and Adventures. That's something I'll talk about a little bit later when we speak about the journey boxes, but that's their monthly experience of learning, and that's an integrated subject that teaches them a whole lot of fun things. We also have something called Habits of Mind. Habits of Mind changes to discourse and mastery, discourse and thinking skills, and then it turns to learning mastery when they get into grade 10 to 12. The critical thing here is to teach children to learn, not to teach children stuff, and particularly not to teach them things that they can look up on Google. It's to teach them how to be learners and to teach them how to think about their learning and learn about their learning. In the senior and intermediate phase, we also have a subject called Ideas. And Ideas is invention and design, the discourse and thinking skills I spoke of, earth studies, art, and scientific practice. And this is genuine art, not just crafts. We're going to be doing significant projects with the kids where they explore their artistic and inner selves in that regard. But once you get into FET, which is only starting in 2022, obviously there's all the subject choices they want to make in order to be ready to go to university. I'll give you a quick look at the foundation phase in the couple of minutes that I have left. And you can see that when it comes to digital mastery, because they're little and because they're still dependent on a lot of input and support from an adult, the intention of the digital mastery course here is to teach them to become more independent in the using of their technology. This is an online school. They need to become independent in the learning of the technology that they use to learn with. iPads are compulsory from grade R all the way through to grade 6. We will control those iPads and we will send all the apps and books they need onto those iPads for them. So they have to learn how to use their iPads and how to use their apps. They also need to learn how to use the Blackboard Ultra Learning Portal, which is a portal that we use in Evolve. It's the same learning portal that our universities use. It's really cutting edge and it's really fun to use, and it looks interesting and exciting and engaging, and it gets kids to be more interested in their learning. They have to learn how to send questions and messages to their teacher. They need to learn how to take part in pair and group activities, how to send work to their teacher. Coding is something we teach all the way from grade R through to grade 9. And then, of course, children can choose to do IT or CAT when they go beyond grade 9. But children might choose to carry on coding and do some backyard Facebook, the next Mark Zuckerberg type stuff. We also teach them how to take videos and photos. And there's a very fun course on being internet awesome, which teaches them how to be safe online, how to know when something is fake news, how to make sure they cite sources properly, and how to reference things so that they're not finding themselves in a situation where they are plagiarizing, whether they mean to or not. The other one I just want to have a quick look at from the point of view of foundation phase is the subject Habits of Mind. This is the social emotional stuff. This is where we teach children how to be able to deal with challenges, how to be able to ask questions, how to become better learners, how to measure their own learning. Also, you will see to try and laugh every day, to take safe risks. We like them to be creative. We want them to remain open to learning and to think independently. And throughout the year in foundation phase, and this Habits of Mind evolves into discourse and thinking. So it becomes the same sort of things, but just a lot more sophisticated. We try to give children the skills they need. I jokingly say, although I'm very serious about it, that one of the key skills that our foundation phase kids have to learn right from the start is how to make their beds in the morning. And then they've got to send us pictures of the fact that they've made their beds so that we can help them to learn to persist even when days they don't feel like making their beds. I spoke about the learning journeys that the little ones are going to go on. This is a splayed out version of the Evolve box. So if you're in foundation phase, every month you receive a box from a courier. Inside that box will be all the materials you need for being able to learn the things you need to do. The little ones are quite tactile learners. You can't expect them to learn everything in an app or online, and so we curate these boxes to you just to give you an idea. These are just indicative of the sorts of things that they're in. We also want you to reuse your box, so we'll have some way of upcycling or recycling the box each month, or maybe mom uses it to create a little busy box for when children are bored and need something to distract them. There's also going to be various items and games for them to use, and each box builds on the next one. So you get items in box 1 and more items in box 2, and the items from box 1 to box 2 add together to make a third activity that children can do. I'm really obviously going through this quite quickly, and I'm happy to discuss it individually or afterwards in the question section skills. So who teaches these kids? How does this teaching work? Okay, we have a model that talks about, and I'm going to use jargon again, synchronous and asynchronous learning. Synchronous learning is when the learning is happening at the same time. Everybody's learning together. They're all online at the same time. They can see each other's faces. They can exchange comments and debate and talk through the learning. The learning activator is running the show and is able to help guide the conversations, or may, in fact, because all our learning activators are qualified teachers, may be able to teach something if she sees that the group needs a little bit more input on that. There's 4 different sets of staff within our system. We have the core team, that's myself, Marie, and a few others. We have our learning architects. These are master teachers from around the Advotech group and outside of the Advotech group. And what's great about this is we're not limited to South Africa in this regard. We can pull in our architects from all over the world. And what they do is they create those pathways. They create those curriculum maps I showed you earlier. They do the planning of the learning that children have to do. And then the big one is the learning activators. Those are the people who will work directly with your children for multiple years. In some cases, a concept called looping. So children will stay with the same teacher across a phase sometimes, or even from one phase into the other in some cases, so that building on what they've learned and the relationship that builds between the teacher and the student can become richer and deeper. We are very, very conscious of the issue of social interaction and social skills, and just that ability to be with other people that is often lacking in an online model. And we're implementing a number of strategies to try and introduce that element into Evolve. And the learning activators is where it starts, because the learning activators are the ones that will develop a one-on-one teacher-learner activator person. The activator, and the reason we call them activators, is they're not there to teach stuff. They're there to engender a passion for learning. In some cases, if your child is running ahead, what they will do is they will create a richer project for them. They'll create a passion project for them. They'll teach them to learn deeper so that they are able to really become experts in the things that they are very interested in. And we all know that children do that. Anybody who's had a young child who gets fascinated with dinosaurs, it seems to be dinosaurs in many cases. They'll suddenly just go nuts and know everything there is to know about dinosaurs. And I promise you, no teacher taught them that. I think that is the sort of passion for learning that gets lost as children are forced more and more along a particular pathway in their learning and are unable to find their own pathway to learning. And then there are also life coaches, and the life coaches work with pairs of students for as long as they are with us, or as long as the students are with us. And the life coaches are the ones who are going to manage the habits of mind, the digital mastery side. They're also there, and particularly when the children get a bit older and need a bit of advice, or need some help in setting up a timetable to study, or need help in teach things like how to take notes effectively. And I've limited myself to 30 minutes and my time's nearly up, but I can say There is so much more that I could tell you about this, and maybe through your questions we can unpack some of the detail, but understand that the life coach's job is to make sure that a child doesn't feel uncomfortable. The learning activator's job is to make sure that the child is learning what they need to learn, that where they struggle, they get extra support, and where they are flying ahead, they get some extra challenges, so they stay within the Goldilocks zone. And also, the learning activator is there to give advice to parents on how they can help their children with the learning. I should also mention that in the foundation phase, the life coaches are there as much for the parents as what they are for the students. So sometimes a life coach will work with parents rather in just helping you maybe set up the learning space differently, or when you're having difficulties or struggling with your child's learning. So this is how we plan to do the social interaction. You've got your child who is learning online, and they're doing that alone, using the Blackboard and the apps and watching the videos and doing the exercises and testing their mastery of things. With their life coach, they're in a pair, and those pairs are geographically paired, so they live close to one another. And if parents wish to create play dates or do those sorts of things, that can be arranged to the life coach. Understand that the information is not shared between these children. They'll know, unless they choose to share it, they'll know who the person is, but they won't have the information about where they live and that sort of thing, unless it's something that the parents are desirous of, so that they can create play dates and have a friend that can come around or go to. Then there's the learning group, the learning activated group. We've divided kids into groups of 10. As far as possible, these will be geographic as well, so that they will live in close proximity. But they're also not necessarily a group that is all the same age, nor are they a group that is all in the same year of learning. In the case of numeracy, your child might be in one group, and in literacy they're in a different group, and when it comes to ideas they're in a third group. So they have different groupings for different purposes. When it comes to group interaction, we try to make sure that children are taught how to be able to work within a group, how to contribute to group. We don't do group work where the group watches the group watches someone work. Our group work is far more collaborative in its learning. And then we're going to have these regular studios, day camps, academies and day camps once a month. These are extra, these are not compulsory, and you can choose whether or not your children should go to those. The studio is focused on the arts and culture. An academy would probably be things like learning to fly drones or doing robotics or something with an academic or STEM bit. And then the day camp is more focused on fun physical activities, the incredible race or doing obstacle courses or that sort of thing. And they're for fun. They're really so that we can engage as a community and build some spirit of shared experience with one another and learn how to support and help one another. Now I'm going to use the 3 words that every audience likes to hear, and in conclusion. And I'm going to just talk about the finances. I think many of you have downloaded this information already. If you haven't, you can go and look at the handout section. You'll see, if you look at your interaction tab, there's a handout section, and I have uploaded the fee schedule and the fast facts to that for you to download. Again, of course, you can download it from our website as well.